Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying?
Welcome to episode 133 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. I am your co-host, Mary, and today I am joined by Darren, the most awesome Civil War nerd I know, because I cannot for the life of me do an intro like he does, and I don't even try anymore because I can't. I tried once and it just fell flat. So anyway, here we are, episode 133. We are back recording where we usually do in Plymouth after being able to record for the first time ever on site somewhere, which was really, really awesome at Grant Hall a few weeks ago. But anyway, Darren, how are you?
Oh my goodness gracious, that's fantastic. That was the best intro we've ever done by far. Not even close. It was pretty good. It was a thing. So anyway, so good point. It is good to be back here in the saddle again, back in Massachusetts doing this episode. So this is nice to be back talking about battles. We got some fun stuff to talk about this evening, Mary.
We do, yes, we do. But first, before we get to that, what are you drinking?
I'm stunned that you remember. Thank you so much for asking. I am drinking. It is the great Narragansett beer, Mary, from Rhode Island.
Jaws.
And I'm drinking it. I'm drinking it today because of the anniversary of Jaws is coming up.
Yep.
And so, what better cup to drink it out of than I'm the reason my country music is so sad, William T. Sherman mug, because he was called the Land Shark at one point, Mary.
He was.
You may have heard that. So that's why I picked the mug. So, anywho, how about you?
I am drinking Support Local, which is by a local brewery here in Plymouth called Mayflower Brewing. Very good. It's obviously an IPA. But if I run out of that, I do have a Narragansett in my Jaws koozie.
Oh, it is good to be back. Admittedly, it is. Today we're talking about a battle that was really the nail in the coffin for the Confederacy in stopping William T. Sherman from taking that pivotal supply hub and manufacturing center of Atlanta, Georgia in the summer of 1864. Now, we'll talk more about the battle, but the battle was a culmination of the Union Army's 1864 Summer of Love that started in Chattanooga on May 7th. By July, Sherman was on Atlanta's doorsteps. It was causing more anxiety to the Atlanta citizens than Tom Brady with the ball in overtime. And it was. But not only did Sherman's monstrous army of over 110,000 people push through Joseph E. Johnson's 60,000 Army of Tennessee, it also caused a huge political ripple effect in that army that basically caused a command change at arguably the worst time and had the worst effects on the Confederacy for the rest of the war.
Yep. To me, this is just my opinion. It's the command change that makes me I'm like, why would you do that? And and I think I know a few other people that feel that way too. But as you were saying, this is part of Sherman's Atlanta campaign, which began in May 1864. And it's following the victories that secured the city of Chattanooga in November of 1863. And that's a really important victory for the Union because now the gateway is open for them to get to Atlanta and further and further into the Confederacy. The other thing to note about 1864 is that it's an election year. So securing the city of Atlanta is important, but it is not the only thing going on in 1864. By this point in 1864, when the Battle of Peachtree Creek, which we're going to be talking about, happens, the Battle of Monocacy has already happened, which is the battle that saved Washington, D.C. Thank you, Lew Wallace. General Sheridan in the Valley is also going to play a bit of a role in what is going to secure the 1864 election for President Abraham Lincoln.
Basically, in a nutshell, Sherman's army moves through Georgia, and when he ran into rebel resistance at places like Resaca, Dallas, Kennesaw, what he would do is he'd flank Johnson on the right, forcing him to fall back closer to Atlanta to defend the city. This repeated itself over and over again to the point that caused significant frustration within the Confederate government and some of Johnson's generals. I mean, just think about it. Sherman has drove Johnston 100 miles towards Atlanta, and by July, he's going to be on the outskirts of the city.
And he's got his 3 armies with him, which he has the Army of the Cumberland, which is commanded by General George Henry Thomas. It's the largest of his 3 armies. He has 60,000 men. Sherman is also going to have the Army of the Tennessee, which is commanded by General James Burbsy McPherson. He has 30,000 men. And the smallest of these armies is going to be the Army of the Ohio, commanded by General Schofield. So he's got this gigantic, as you said, it's a land shark that is slowly making its way to Atlanta. They've had battles like Resaca, Pickett's Mill, Kennesaw, and all that so far.
Yeah, and the Confederates, and really preparation of Sherman's advance to the city, the Confederates built a series of defenses at the Chattahoochee River, that real last line of defense for Atlanta. Now, these defenses were significant, and it was called basically the Chattahoochee line. It was also called the Johnston line, and was really the Civil War equivalent of the French Maginot Line. in World War II. It really was. It was a series of earthworks designed by a guy named Francis A. Shoup, Mary. It was about 10 miles long, surrounding the perimeter of the city. It had 5 unique redoubts that were named after the designer, and they were called Shoupades. They had 16-foot walls. They were all designed to keep Sherman out. This line had 19-gun positions with 77 artillery pieces, abatis in front to prevent them climbing the walls. The Rebs also cut down thousands of trees in front to create a clear line of fire for the artillery. So this was kind of their last gasp, if you think about it. But the huge problem, though, was that the line really had its back to the Chattahoochee River. So Johnston, he was so confident that he could hold this line that he told Jefferson Davis, Mary, who was the president of the Confederacy. I don't know if you know that.
Not the guy with the hat.
He was not. He told J. Davis that he could hold this line for up to a month, and that his much smaller army, which we'll talk about, was going to be able to hold back Sherman's larger one. But it's fascinating, though, that if he really believed that, Johnston had his headquarters where? On the other side of the river, just to be safe. So it's just fascinating that he gave himself that position. But unfortunately for Johnston, that line he felt he could defend for a month, it lasted about a week because Sherman is going to pull that rope-a-dope on Johnston yet again and to get around Johnston's flank.
So Johnston is eventually going to abandon what you said was the Chattahoochee line. This is going to be kind of the final nail in the coffin for Johnston leading the Army of Tennessee.
Yeah, but it's great how he does it, though, because he always went around to the right, right? That's how he flanked him, right? But at this point, you know what Sherman does? He sends John Schofield and that Army of the Ohio you mentioned around the rebel right, the Union left, where they cross the Chattahoochee to outflank the rebel position, making that Johnston line completely untenable. So once again, what does Johnston do? He's forced to fall back and move to a high ground about a mile south to a stream called Peachtree Creek, which is a tributary to the main Chattahoochee River. And the good thing about this for Johnston is the spring and summer rains had flooded the area. So Johnston hoped that this flooded Peachtree Creek in this Chattahoochee tributary would really create a really difficult pass for Sherman to get through for any Union invaders, and would actually deter Sherman from attacking Atlanta directly.
Yeah, well, that's, as we're going to see, that's not going to be the case. Sherman is going to end up crossing the Chattahoochee as well. I've seen it compared to when Caesar crosses the Rubicon. So once Caesar crosses the Rubicon, you can't go back. Once Sherman crosses the Chattahoochee, that is seen as he can't go back. It means he cannot go back north. And he is now committed to getting Atlanta and capturing the city. If he goes back across, that's going to have severe consequences for the North, and they don't need the morale broken. That was a big thing on his part. Now, mind you, Johnston doesn't really do anything to stop him from crossing the Chattahoochee, which I think was another thing that kind of is making Jeff Davis like, what is Johnston's plan with this? When they crossed the river, Johnston wrote a letter to a member of General Hood's staff, of all people. And it said, "Our presence on the south side of the Chattahoochee created considerable alarm, and the good people of that city have been getting to the rear in a hurry." So I think the people of Atlanta are thinking, like, what? Like, is Sherman going to be here at any point?
That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, and that's what they're, think Gone with the Wind and the panic in that movie. But that was more around the battle of, like, the kind of the siege of Atlanta. So it's creating increased panic among the citizens of Atlanta. And it's causing rumors to flow amongst the soldiers now that, is Johnston really going to fight for the city? Or is he just going to abandon it to General Sherman and his gigantic army? And Johnston did give indications that he was going to hold the city as long as possible. But again, like Davis and also General Bragg, Davis's military advisor, who's going to come into play here in a few minutes, they are really starting to question what exactly General Joseph E. Johnston's intentions are with the city of Atlanta and what he plans to do with Sherman.
Well, that's the whole thing. We talk about the big picture, right? Elections coming up. Johnston goes to Atlanta, holds out as long as he can, runs the clock out to the election. And that's probably the big picture. But what is it? What short picture? You've got 22,000 loyal Confederate citizens in Atlanta. You've got a major supply and manufacturing hub. You've already lost Chattanooga. You've already lost a lot of the ports. You cannot lose Atlanta. And this game plan is causing a pucker effect in Richmond, and is causing a lot of people upset. Now, Joseph E. Johnston and Jefferson Davis were not exactly besties. They were not even close. They weren't at all.
No.
And basically, and the commanding general, he complained regularly about the fact that he didn't have enough men to fight Sherman, especially for an offensive attack. And that's a big theme with this. And we see it a lot with another guy on the northern side.
General
who always
McClellan.
complained, right?
Yep.
And it's the same thing. He's always asking for more men. Now, Johnson comes up with a plan to use rebel cavalry to disrupt Sherman's rail line in northern Georgia that was supplying supplies to the Federals. But since he couldn't spare any of his own men, what does he do? He reaches out to Davis to pull cavalry from Alabama to try to do it for him. Now, Davis did not buy the Army of Tennessee's numbers that were much smaller than Sherman, so he rejected the request, basically telling Johnston, look, you got plenty of cavalry in this army to conduct the raid using your own men. Dare I say, Mary, Davis was overestimating the size of his Johnston. There we go, okay?
Bad joke for the episode.
I know, whatever, anyway. But so again, Johnston paused, basically because he could not spare any cavalry, and this pissed off Davis immensely, and the raid on Sherman's supply line was never made. Now, it was around this time when some of Johnston's subordinates were getting fed up with their commander as well. It started sending messages directly to Davis behind Johnson's back, complaining about him. Specifically, two people, Mary, William Hardee and John Bell Hood. Now, they both wrote to the Army of Tennessee and current Davis advisor, Braxton Bragg, Mary, complaining that Johnston had missed several opportunities to attack Sherman during this campaign and just didn't do it. In a very self-promoting letter to Braxton Bragg, John Bell Hood wrote, and I quote, Mary, I have, General, so often urged that we should force the enemy to give us battle as to almost be regarded reckless by the officers high in rank in this army. Since my views have been so directly the opposite, I regard it as a great misfortune that we have failed to give battle to the enemy so many miles north of our present position. Please say to the president that I shall continue to do my duty cheerfully and faithfully. John Bell Hood, XOXO. That's the letter that he writes to him. Now, also, Cavalry Commander Joseph Warchild Wheeler, Mary, he suggested that the plan that Johnston suggested of attacking Sherman's supply line, guess what? It was his idea. And when he presented it to Johnston, Johnston said, no, we ain't doing that. And so this is all going on, not just but the military, but the politicians. Georgia Senator Benjamin Hill, he visited Davis in Richmond, and when he returned, he sent Johnston, Hill did an urgent message saying, for God's sakes, do it, meaning attack. Johnston ignores the message, just ignores it.
Yep.
Georgia Governor Joseph E. Brown, who will later be part of that corrupt Georgia Bourbon triumvirate with John Brown Gordon and Alfred Colquitt, he begged Johnston to attack and save the city from Sherman. But again, guess what? He ignores it. So again, this is really when Davis is going to start to give serious thought about maybe replacing Johnston as Sherman drew closer. But little did Sherman know that while he was moving his chess pieces into place to attack, his mere presence was causing a political crisis in Richmond.
Yeah.
But the thing is Davis did not want to fire Johnston at this point because he had no idea who to replace him with. It's great when you want to get rid of somebody. It's like you're firing your football coach. Get rid of him. But you have no one to bring back. What are you going to do? So what does he do? He dispatches Bragg to go to Atlanta, who's going to arrive on July 13th, and he's going to meet with Joseph E. Johnson and his high-ranking subordinates. Yeah. Now, soon later, Braxey is going to message Davis, ripping on Johnston, basically saying, look, I have no idea what he's planning to do with Atlanta. I don't think he knows what he wants to do.
Yeah, Bragg went there. It was very shady. Like, he didn't disclose exactly why he was there.
This is all behind back stuff.
Yeah.
Braxton says, I think what you should do is you should fire Johnston, and you should bring in John Bell Hood. And he says, and this is a quote from Bragg, he says that he was the best they had, all considering the situation, was a shot at Hardee, is what that was.
Yeah.
Going back to the previous stuff, right?
Yeah.
But Davis was still not convinced, and he was afraid that dumping Johnston would cause problems with the men who loved him. And because Johnston didn't recklessly attack, he didn't put these people in a situation where he was going to risk their lives. And the men loved him. Morale was already low in the Army of Tennessee. So firing the popular Joseph E. Johnston would probably bottom them out if you think about it. Also, replacing Johnston would screw up the command structure of the Army right when Sherman is on the doorstep.
Yeah, it's not a good time to change. And I mean, even Davis is writing to Robert E. Lee. There was a letter that he said General Johnston has failed and there are strong indications he will abandon Atlanta. He also writes in this letter, he urges that prisoners should be immediately removed from Andersonville. So who knows what Johnston is thinking at that point. But then Davis also says it seems necessary to remove him at once. And then he says, who should succeed him, comma, what think you of Hood for the position? At that point, he is considering Hood. And then, as you said, Hood also writes a letter where he's openly criticizing Johnston. But the thing is, some of that criticism that, Hood is saying, he was the one that sometimes told Johnston, no, I don't think we should attack. There was one incident where it happened and Johnston said he regretted it afterwards. He was like, I don't know why I listened to them.
That's the whole thing. And for the next 3 days after Davis gets this message, he's going to kind of just waffle, decide what he wants to do in his mind. And he's going to message Johnston. He's going to basically say, okay, dude, listen, what exactly is your plan? Just tell me what it is. This is on July 16th, 1864. Davis got Johnston's message explaining what his intention was to defend the city of Atlanta. In this note, again, said, once again, I need more men. I don't have that many. Therefore, I'm left with no other possible solution than to continue my defensive position around Atlanta. Now, when Davis got this message, he yelled fudge, but he didn't say fudge. Okay. He realized that Johnston was going to sacrifice Atlanta. It's what you said a little while ago, that vital supply hub and all those citizens. He was going to just let him get sieged and let him get beaten down to run the clock out. Now, the next day on July 17th, Davis has basically had enough. He's like, you know what? I wanted a plan. You sent me the same crap again. I'm going to need to get rid of him. So he does. July 17th, he's going to fire Joseph E. Johnston from command. He's going to take Bragg's advice, and he's going to install the uber-aggressive John Bell Hood and made him a temporary full general. Now, we've talked a lot about Hood in previous episodes, and we'll eventually do a full deal. Yeah. But real quick, his background, because people know who he is, but he's born in June of 1831 in Owensville, Kentucky. He's not a Texan, Mary. He's a Kentuckian. Let's get to that. The son of Dr. John Willis Hood and Theodosia French Hood, the cousin of U.S. Representative Richard French Mary, who was against his father's wishes, arranged for John to get an appointment to West Point. And that's how he got there. At West Point, John Bell Hood, who was known as Sam to his peers, was kind of like you in high school. Not a good student.
I was a good student. I was just a nerd and got shoved into lockers a lot.
That's probably true. But Hood, he graduated 44th out of 52 in a class that included future combatants John Burbs McPherson, John Schofield, Phil Sheridan, as well as future Confederate, the gallant John Bowen, Mary. But the thing about it, though, Hood almost didn't graduate. He was a demerit machine. He got 196 demerits. 200, you were gone. He got 196. For such infractions such as disobedience and an overall bad appearance. Okay.
Oh my God, the poor guy. I mean,
his decisions were usually wrong and not really right. Right? There you go. Right. The superintendent of cadets at West Point at that time, Mary, was a guy named Robert E. Lee. And he took a shine to Hood and basically made him lieutenant of cadets. Ironically, he was tasked with enforcing discipline. Okay. So, but Lee quickly learned that he made a huge mistake, and within 2 months, Hood got in trouble again for, quote, absent without authority, whatever the heck that means.
Where do you go? You're on a military base.
But in 1860, Hood is offered a position at West Point as chief instructor of cavalry. But he turned it down because 1860, there's rumblings of war coming. He wants to position himself in the South is what he wants to do. Between graduating and then, he found himself in the 2nd Lieutenant in the 4th U.S. Cavalry, 2nd U.S. Infantry, in California, and then sent to the 2nd U.S. Cavalry in Texas, where he served under Albert Sidney Johnson and Robert E. Lee. 1857, he's fighting the Comanches. He's famously shot in the hand by the arrow. That whole story. But after the firing of Fort Sumter, Hood resigned his commission and he moved to where? To Texas. Why? Because Kentucky was neutral. Yep. He wanted to fight for the Confederacy. That's how he gets to Texas.
Wow.
He's going to rise quickly. He'll serve in the cavalry on the peninsula under our old friend John Magruder, Mary. And then on September 30th, 1861, he's made the colonel of the 4th Texas. Now, a few months later, in February of 1862, he gets command of what's called the Texas Brigade. Mm-hmm. This is the famous 1st, the 4th, the 5th Texas, as well as the 18th Georgia. Yeah, there were Georgians there, Mary. Wow. Commanded by William Wofford, of all people. Hood is going to quickly earn the reputation of being a very aggressive commander while serving on the peninsula under W.H.C. Whiting's division. So he's the type, again, he's going to personally lead his men from the front. His Texas Brigade is going to become one of the elite brigades of the entire Confederate Army. You know, we talked a lot about Hood at Gaines Mill on June 27th of 1862 when he led that charge and broke the Union line. A month later, when General Whiting gets sick and goes on medical leave, Hood becomes a division commander under James Longstreet. So his star is on the rise. Hood's division fought relentlessly at 2nd Manassas. He lost 1,000 men. He also got arrested by his boss, Nathan Shanks Evans, something about a captured ambulance train. Who the hell knows, but he got arrested. He got arrested by Shanks for it. But General Lee is going to basically rescue him from that arrest. He's going to basically continue to lead his men. He's going to lead his men at South Mountain and Antietam, where he's going to lose 2,000 more men. Mm-hmm. And he's going to earn the title of Major General on October 10th of 1862. Famously, he's going to fight at the Gettysburg near the Bushman Farm. He's going to be wounded on July 2nd on that echelon attack, and he's going to be sent to Richmond to recover. Now, it's on this rehab mission to Richmond where he's going to become close friends with Jefferson Davis. Yes. This is where he's going to get to know him. And Davis said of Hood, he had a fierce light in his eyes that I can never forget. Okay. Yep. But that's what it was. So what is Hood? He's a super aggressive guy. He fights. He puts his men in tough positions, but he's up front with them. Eventually, he's going to get sent west as part of Longstreet's corps. He'll be wounded again at Chickamauga. He'll find himself a new home in the Army of Tennessee. And before too long, at just 33 years old, he finds himself promoted now by Davis to be the commander of the Army of Tennessee. Yep. And the thing about it, though, is Davis, he may have been happy to finally get his aggressive battle commander. Now, again, you mentioned before, Joseph Johnson, passive, falls back for 100 miles back to the doorstep of Atlanta. Doesn't want to fight. He wants to redeploy, fight defenses, redeploy. But not everybody in the Confederacy was happy about this move, including Robert E. Lee, Mary, of all people. Hood was someone who was trained under Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee. And this is where he's young. But a lot of these people in the South were not happy about this. They called Hood a butcher, a lot of the soldiers, because of his previous battles and his reputation of maybe being too aggressive. Many of his officers doubted Hood's abilities above the division level. Now, we mentioned that before. Robert E. Lee said it specifically of Hood when he got promoted to this position by Davis. Lee quoted, he said, "Hood is a bold fighter, but I am doubtful to the other qualities necessary." Lee wanted William Hardee to take command. Yeah. But again, Hardee was offered the position. He noped it. So Davis was not going back to that well.
I don't blame him for that, and we've talked about this many times, but if you know the history of Army of Tennessee, it has been, especially since the death of Albert Sidney Johnston at the Battle of Shiloh, it's been a mess. But it was a mess, I think, I shouldn't say a mess. It was just very much like, I don't know if I want to say mismanaged. I mean, we've always said the Western theater, and this is something good. It's like the land of misfit toys. It's such an interesting study for that reason, because you were getting not just the military stuff, but there's a lot of drama. And there's definitely a lot of drama in the Army of Tennessee. Shot Pouch Walker, he writes his wife after the change in command. And he said of Hardee, Hardee's star has always been in the ascendant, and he always the most dashing light around the throne. I wonder how he likes to have it obscured and suffer an eclipse by the passing of this new planet between him and the sun. That just says it all right there, how Hardee felt. Hardee says no, but then he's not happy about this change in command. But I mean, Hardee is not like, I'm not taking on this role. He was one of the louder voices to go against Braxton Bragg. He was one of the ones that signed that petition. Would he have been a good commander? I think he probably would have. I mean, I like Hardee. He's a pretty competent guy. You know, and the soldiers in Army of Tennessee, they like Johnston, even though he's not really, they don't know what he's doing now that they've fallen back towards Atlanta, but they like him. And I think it's kind of like he's, you know, kind of, I think he's around the same age as Robert E. Lee. So there's that kind of that father figure going on, I think, too. And now you've got this, what is Hood, 33 years old,
right,
in charge of the Army. And I think that's a change that no one was expecting. And meanwhile, over on the Union side, you have thoughts that the Union troops have. You know, General Howard said of that Johnston was cautious, wary, flexible, full of expedients, whereas Hood was incautious, blunt, strong-willed, and fearless of Sherman's strategy. He was not the general to execute any plan but his own, and then he ought not to have had a Sherman or a Thomas for an opponent. In a letter to his wife, now this is after the Battle of Peachtree Creek, Howard will write, "Hood is a stupid fellow, but a hard fighter. Does very unexpected things." And that's the most insulting thing I've ever found that Howard has written.
Well, I mean, it was you mentioned before. I mean, going back to the Confederacy again, not just the senior guys, but Arthur Manigault. You know, he's a brigade commander in S.D. Lee's corps. He said of Hood's promotion, again, the Army received the announcement with very bad grace and no little murmuring. Fun fact about Manigault, by the way, his uncle Arthur Middleton Mary was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and probably knew about the map on the back. Right? There you go. But the thing about it, though, you saw a lot of the Confederates not liking it. A lot of the Union guys liked it. When Sherman heard of the news, he couldn't believe it. He writes to his wife, Ellen, he says, "At this critical moment, the Confederate government rendered us the most valuable of services. I confess I was pleased with the change." Why was he pleased? Because he was thrilled at the prospect of the aggressive Hood attacking his entrenched army now, when he knew that Hood had probably half the numbers that he did. George Thomas, shockingly, was the only guy in the Union who was more cautious. He said of Hood, "Hood will hit you before you know it." That's what he said. He was kind of like the, well, I don't know, Davey.
He's
right?
Eeyore.
That's kind of what he was.
He's
right.
Eeyore. But I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so this is kind of the setup with it. So when Sherman is going to, Nick, you said a while ago, when Sherman is going to cross the Chattahoochee, he's going to move his men southeast in an arc towards Decatur, Georgia, which is about 8 miles east of Atlanta, to cut the railroad in and out of the city, right? So going back to July 17th again, George Thomas and his Army of the Cumberland, the biggest one, they're on the northern bank of the Chattahoochee River, while James Burbsy McPherson's Army of the Tennessee and his 20,000 men were about 12 miles away. Joseph Schofield's Army of the Ohio was on the eastern shore of the river between Thomas and McPherson. Now, again, the next day on the 18th, Thomas is going to reach Peachtree Creek, which was only defended by a small cavalry force for the most part and some infantry on the south bank, and he kind of drove them off pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
But McPherson and Schofield, you know, they soon arrived just north later on, while east of Atlanta, cavalry under a guy named Colonel Kennard Garrard, his division is going to be cutting the railroad, the Georgia Railroad. Now, Sherman, again, what is he doing? He's slowly choking Atlanta with the goal of separating it from the rest of the Confederacy. And once he cuts the tracks leading from Atlanta to Montgomery, Alabama, he's going to be ready. He has them isolated. And again, Sherman, he's going to write to George Thomas on July 19th, the day before the battle we're going to talk about. He writes, "With McPherson, Howard, and Schofield, I should have ample to fight the whole of Hood's army, leaving you to walk into Atlanta, capturing guns and everything." He's a confident fellow, Mary, at this point.
He's very confident. But that goes back to, you know, when Hood gets placed in charge, Sherman does go to John Schofield, his classmate at West Point, and asks him about it. And their conversation, basically Sherman comes away from it and he says in his memoirs, "I just inferred from that means we're finally going to fight." And I think, you know, as you said, that makes Sherman feel better. It means they're going to stop this. Because I think he, like Johnson, just whatever he was doing, he was able to keep falling back. And keep in mind that although they're a lot of the battles on the Atlanta campaign so far they're smaller scale compared to what you're seeing in the Eastern Theater with the Gettysburgs and all that. And they're not as big as the battles for Chattanooga or Chickamauga. But very slowly, both armies are losing men. And that's that's very draining on them.
They are. They've reached that stagnant point, but now the Army of Tennessee is a little different now. And with Hood now, they got about 35,000 infantry, about 10,000 cavalry, 1,500 militia, clowns maybe, we don't know. But they're in a defensive position 1 mile south of Peachtree Creek, and they're going to set up in a line with Alexander P. Stewart's corps on the rebel left, William Hardee's corps basically in the middle, and Benjamin Cheatham, who's now been promoted to replace Hood, is going to be on the rebel right. He's also got Joseph Wheeler's cavalry kind of guarding the eastern roads into Atlanta. And perhaps remembering his old days under Lee, who fought under less men, Hood decided the best defense is an offense. Now, again, you got to remember, too, he kind of cut his teeth under Lee. Lee was never concerned about numbers. You look at Chancellorsville, you look at Gettysburg, you look at Fredericksburg, pick them all. So what is Hood like? He's like, if I fight a good strategy and I fight aggressively and I have the terrain, the high grounds, and if I'm smart, I can beat this much larger army, because that's what Lee taught him. But he's not Lee, and that's what gets him.
No,
and that's what's good, right?
No, and Hood also is going into this role. He is not happy about it. And that's one thing that definitely needs to be mentioned, is that there are stories that he did try to persuade Davis to change his mind. And he did say upon taking command, "I feel the weight of responsibility so suddenly and unexpectedly devolved upon me." So there are people that that say Hood was seeking command. This is what he did deliberately. But there's also the other side of it, that he wasn't. And that letter he wrote was just to try and get Johnston replaced, but not replaced with him. Right. And then, so it's debated if Hood did get that command deliberately. The other thing, too, that he's going into this battle of Peachtree Creek is that he actually thought Joseph E. Johnston was going to stick around for a little bit. And guess what? Johnston completely ghosts him. He says to him a couple days before, "Yeah, I'm just going to go to Atlanta for a few days and I'll come back and I'll kind of help you with the transition to power." That doesn't happen. And Hood is bitter about it for the rest of his life. He is left basically abandoned, and he's, this plan, this Battle of Peachtree Creek, as I'm sure we'll talk about, it has been, some have credited it with being Joseph E. Johnston's plan.
Well, it was Joseph E. Johnston's plan. Yeah. It completely was his plan. It certainly was. Now, the thing about it, though, is, but he was going to pull the trigger. Who the hell knows? I mean, Hood's target at this point, because he knows he has Thomas's Army of the Cumberland kind of split up a little bit. Yeah, that's going to be the target, because he knows that Thomas is going to be crossing that swollen Peachtree Creek north of Atlanta, and they'd be vulnerable while they were crossing. So he knew, Hood did, that while they were crossing, Thomas had little chance to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. If he timed it, if the timing was right, he could pull it off just right. That was his plan. So late on July 19th, Hood's going to call a meeting with his subordinates, a council of war, right? That's what he's going to call, to go over this plan of attack. But he demanded them. Hood said, this attack has to start no later than 1 p.m. tomorrow. Has to. No later.
Should never put a time on things in the Civil War.
Well, exactly.
Because it never happens.
And so what does he do? He dusts off the old playbook from Gettysburg with James Longstreet and decides, hey, I'm going to do an echelon attack. It almost worked at Gettysburg in a much bigger situation. It was mismanaged and it didn't work because timing. If I get my guys to attack when I say, and we hit them just right, like Longstreet could have, my echelon attack is going to break this line. So you can see where he gets it from, but that's what he's going to do. So he's going to attack an echelon from right to left with using 7 divisions, 4 under William Hardee and 3 under Alex Stewart. He's going to put them 200 yards apart from each other, and they would attack Thomas's 4 Union divisions at Peachtree Creek. Solid plan overall. Eventually, this weight of this attack would break the line of the Union. The Rebs would breach the gap and crush the Union line. Everyone goes home, gets ice cream. That was the plan, right? For the most part. Hood is going to tell Stuart and Hardee, you take everything south of Peachtree Creek and you hold it at all hazards. You stay right there. Now, we'll go through the breakdown of how this whole thing goes. But William Bates' division, which is part of Hardee's corps in the far right, they're going to be chosen to lead the attack, followed by Shot Pouch Walker. We talked about him. And then George Maney's division is going to follow. Dominoes fall. Bang, bang, bang. Patrick Cleburne's hard-fighting division is going to be in reserve, and they're going to stay in the back. And as soon as that break happens, Cleburne's going in. And that's when they're going to attack. They're going to hit them with your strongest division when their pants are down.
He's going to Kool-Aid man it?
He's going to Kool-Aid man right through. He's going to hit that with his shillelagh. He's going to get right through. Fun fact, though, he doesn't have Thomas Hindman here. Hindman's lost because he ran into a branch with knocked his eye out on a horse, and he's on medical leave of all things, right? But so really, and then continuing down that line, once you finish with Hardee's corps, you've got Stuart's 3 division. First under William Loring, and then Edward Walthall, and finally Samuel French. And they're going to continue that assault on Thomas, hoping to break the line, force them back to the Chattahoochee, where their backs going to be towards the river, where they're going to be trapped, and they're going to get them, right? The final piece of Hood's plan was to put Benjamin Cheatham's corps and Joseph Wheeler's cavalry on the far right of Hardee to get between Thomas and the armies of Schofield and McPherson to block them from coming to assist, because they're out east. They're east of Atlanta. They're north and east. If he puts, he's going to put Cheatham and he's going to put Wheeler there. So he's going to separate this Army of the Cumberland right in the crosshairs. They can no one's going to come help them, push them. Their back's going to be against the Chattahoochee River. Even with only 30-something thousand guys, we're going to beat them. That's the whole plan. Hood wanted to beat Thomas in detail while they were separated from the rest of Sherman's army, and he hoped that a quick, time-specific, coordinated attack would demolish them before the others could arrive. But there's a problem, Mary. There's always a problem, right? The problem is this. While Hood is making his plans to attack on the 20th, you know who else is making plans? Sherman.
Sherman is making plans, and
he's making plans to be contrary to what Hood wants. Sherman is going to order a portion of his army to start the march to Atlanta from Decatur, like we said, east of the city, which is just eight miles away, at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is about 6 hours, or I guess it would be like 10 hours before Hood's planned attack. On that same day, using Blackjack Logan's 15th Corps from McPherson's Army of the Tennessee. Now, again, within just a few hours of 5 o'clock in the morning, we're on the 20th now, Logan's already 3 miles from the city.
Yeah.
And he started to shell the city. There's a story where a small child is killed crossing the street with her parents from artillery fire. It's an ugly, Atlanta's ugly, right? But Hood realizes, he's like, oh crap. He realizes now, I'm planning to attack north of Atlanta. I have an existential threat coming from the east now. and under a serious threat to the city coming from Cheatham, who's already east of Hardee.
Yeah.
So Hood is gonna take advice of the Spice Girls here and shimmy to the right. Is what he's gonna do and move.
If you're having a good time,
over. Exactly, that's what he's gonna do. Now he's gonna order Cheatham to move to the east to protect the city from Blackjack coming. So that's gonna separate Cheatham from the rest of the Confederate army that he wants to attack. So he's specific to Cheatham. Here's where you need to go. And guess what Cheatham does? He screws it up.
Yeah, there's so much and again, you always say, there's 3 things that will get you: miscommunication, terrain, and weather. In this case, with the Battle of Peachtree Creek, it is miscommunication that is definitely screwing things up for the Confederates here.
It does. So what does Cheatham do? He goes 2 miles too far to the east, and it creates a gigantic gap. So now Cheatham's not going to be able to hold Schofield away and McPherson away. He takes himself off the dance floor. So now that reserves, that protection to hold them he's going to hold the nose, but now he can't do it anymore. So they're gone. The other problem is Cheatham is going to take a full 2 hours to get into position. So Stewart and Hardee are sitting in the woods on Rose Cloud Alert, looking in the woods, okay? And they're waiting to begin the attack. Now, again, this attack was supposed to start at 1 p.m. specific, okay? And right off the bat, the timing's out the window, thanks to Logan's move to the city from Decatur. And that's how you get lucky if you're Sherman, and how you get unlucky if you're Hood.
Yeah.
So this time frame is important because guess what happens while they're waiting? Thomas is now able to move his men across Peachtree Creek unmolested, and soon the Union troops are able to set up defensive earthworks on high ground just a half a mile south of the creek. Remember, the plan was to hit them while they were crossing. Now they're across. The horse is out of the barn now.
Yeah, they get across.
So instead of hitting Thomas while he's holding his diaper in the rain and unprepared, now he's going to have to hit Thomas's Army of the Cumberland on high ground in defensive positions. Oh, crap. That's what's going to happen. So now it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Hardee has to realign as well. He's in position to attack, so he sends word to Alexander Stewart and says, basically, who's on his left, he says, I'm almost ready, so, get ready. That's kind of what he's saying. Hardee is going to give a big speech. He's going to tell his men, the fate of Atlanta and the outcome of the battle rests on us. This big emotional speech that Hardee does, right? And so an hour or so later, so we're getting close to 3 o'clock in the afternoon now. It's supposed to start at 1 o'clock. William Bates' lead division we talked about, they're going to begin to move out. Guess what happens when they start to move out? They get lost.
Yep.
They go the wrong frigging way. Inexplicably, when they get started, they end up on the wrong side of a creek called Clear Creek and proceeded to go into a swampy area and got lost for a couple hours.
There was probably snakes.
But again, a lot of it's because that huge gap that they're going. But they're going too far to the right. Yeah. And instead of going 1 o'clock high, they're going 2:30 high, and now they're veering off to the right. They're going into a swamp, going away from the action. And again, they're supposed to be the initial attack. The echelon attack depends on Bates' division starting the dance, and the rest of the army's waiting for Bate, and he's lost now. So Bate was quite surprised, Mary, when he started marching, and he couldn't find any Union troops, shockingly. And he's going to march right into that large gap between Thomas's Army of the Cumberland and Schofield's Army of the Ohio, far off to the east. And they're going to be stumbling around looking for Union troops to fight. That's what's going to happen. And again, this is supposed to be the echelon attack. So Stewart's divisions, Loring, Walthall, and French, are going to have to wait until Hardee's gone in. So they're just sitting around again. So this is July 2nd, 1863, Gettysburg all over again. Yeah. They're waiting, right? So Shot Pouch Walker's men, they start to move in anyway. They're the next line to go in after Bate. Even though they didn't hear any fighting on their right from Bate, they're going to start to move in. And they're going to be the first division that's going to find action. They're going to hit a Union division under John Newton's division in the 4th Corps, commanded by guess who?
John Newton.
Yeah. Oliver Otis
Howard.
Yes. Okay, Howard is going to be the Corps commander. Now, Newton's guys, his divisions, they're already entrenched now because they're waiting. So Shot Pouch's men are going to run into them. Bate now hears rumblings on his lefts of fire, cannon fire, and he starts to march towards the sound of the guns. And he's going to finally find Newton's right flank where he was supposed to be.
Yep.
Under a brigade of Georgians under Clement Stevens is going to capture a portion of the Union earthworks on the right-hand side. But again, they're going to hold these earthworks for a little while, but they're going to get pushed back until Clement Stevens gets mortally wounded. But
yeah. And Howard does say, Howard's description of the Battle of Peachtree Creek is really worth reading. Now, it's just from his perspective and what his guys were doing. But he says of Newton that Newton could never be surprised. And when they were crossing, like they had to build bridges and stuff. And like Newton apparently got his done in like record time or whatever. But like Newton is a guy, like Howard was really impressed with him. Geary is there too. Howard's really impressed with him. Like Howard is just like, kind of like I don't want to say he's along for the ride because he's in charge here. Of this,
he's kind of along for the ride.
Yeah, he is actually. Yeah. No, I'm gonna say, yeah, he's just like, whoa, wow, these guys are really good, kind of thing. But you know, he's got Wood, Newton, and Stanley with him, and they're all having to cross, and they all have to like, a lot of them have to build bridges and stuff. But the other thing that Howard does talk a lot about is just the terrain that they are up against, that it is like steep, it's crazy, it's not fun. It's basically the Western theater, which is, and I think he's writing about it to contrast it with what he experienced in the Eastern theater, but he's very descriptive about the terrain that they are encountering at this battle.
Yeah. And speaking of terrain, Bates' men, there's the rest of the division. They're stumbling around the left of Newton's main line, and they are going to run to the 3rd Brigade under the command of Luther Bradley and his Illinois men. Now, Bradley is able to drive them back. Bate is going to have repeated attacks on Bradley, but Battery on Illinois under Wilbur Godspeed, his Battery A from the 1st Ohio and Battery M of the 1st Illinois, are going to help drive Bate back. So Bate's going to be kind of on an island fighting on his own. And he's going to be to the right of instead of hitting them straight up, he's hitting them on their right flank. So he's going to fight them, but it's not going to do anything for this echelon. He's fighting on an island. The Woods, speaking of terrain, really prevented Bate from attacking with his full division. So he had his Kentucky Brigade under Joseph Lewis, Brigade of Georgians and Tennesseans under Thomas Smith, as well as Jesse Finley's Florida Brigade. They're going to attack piecemeal because they can't attack full because they're in the woods. They're in the wrong position. They ended up firing back and forth for the rest of the day. But for the most part, Bates' division took themselves out of this battle and was ineffective really from right at the beginning. So Bate has pretty much taken himself off the dance floor. Next in line is George Maney's division. Now, Maney, the last one in Hardee's Corps, he was the last one, so he had to wait until Shot Pouch Walker's division on his right to move.
Yeah.
But he didn't wait, and he moves forward when they saw the 1st Brigade, again of John Newton's division, commanded by our old friend Nathan Kimball, Maryball people, who was all by themselves and separated from the rest of Newton's division. Now, once they encountered Kimball, Maney's men, for some reason, stopped pursuing and fell on their stomachs and spent the rest of they stopped marching. They took to the ground, as the phrase is.
Given Kimball's history, I don't blame them. I mean, this is the man to beat Stonewall Jackson and General Lee, right?
Well, I mean, they're supposed to march forward and attack. They start marching forward and they stop and they drop. And they stop, drop, and roll. But they don't move forward. So again, this is another division that's supposed to attack. It's supposed to have 7 divisions. One of them took themselves out of position. One isn't going. One stays. So right off the bat, they drop. On Kimball's right, which is the end of Newton's division, would be the division of a guy named William T. Ward from Joseph Hooker's 20th Corps. Now, they weren't there at the beginning. Ward's division was the last to arrive at Peachtree Creek and had to move up quickly. And this is kind of a fascinating story with Ward, okay? They heard from pickets from the Rebs who were trying that the Rebs are trying to exploit a gap that emerged between the divisions of John Geary and Newton's division because Ward wasn't there yet. They were supposed to be in that position, so there's a gap between the two. And they're going to supposed to be at a place called Collier Road. That's where they're supposed to go. Now, one of William Loring's brigades, who's next in that echelon attack, 6 regiments of Mississippians under a guy named Winfield and Featherston, they come really close to punching through that gap through Ward's division right then. But Ward's going to arrive at this gap in the nick of time. 3 Union brigades under Ward, commanded by future U.S. President Benjamin Harrison, Mary, John Coburn and James Wood, are going to rush their brigade south as Featherston rushes north. Now, it's cool when you think about this a little bit because usually in Civil War battles, you've got one army who's playing defense. They're entrenched, they're waiting behind a wall, and you have the other ones who are coming to attack them. This is different. This is like the beginning of a football game. You have 2 armies rushing forward at each other, and they hit themselves straight on to the place called Redland Road, and they fight where they hit. So no one's set in position. They're going to go in and hit. Ward's men is able to basically plug that gap, and Featherston is going to be stopped from exploiting it. But it's funny because after the battle, the division commander, William Ward, he takes credit for it. Oh, I led my men forward. We stopped Featherston. Everything's great. We saved the day. But those three brigade commanders say, no, he wasn't there. As a matter of fact, he was hammer drunk in the back. We ordered the charge forward. We were late because he was drunk, so we had to take initiative ourselves to move forward. We rushed to Redland Road to stop Featherston. We deserve the credit. But at this moment, the rebels are in a complete state of confusion. They're firing in all kinds of directions. This echelon coordinated attack is completely foobar at this point. It's off the trails. They're all fighting. Every general is their own commanding general at this point in these brigades. The echelon attack is screwed up from the start, right at the beginning. On Featherston's left was another one of Loring's brigades under Thomas N. Scott. And he was made of Alabamians and a regiment from Louisiana. And they're going to discover a single regiment 500 yards ahead of the rest of the line on top of a hill, which is the 33rd New Jersey under Patrick Henry Jones in John Geary's division. This regiment was known as the Mutinous 33rd. That was their nickname.
Wow.
And they got this nickname because when it was recruited, they recruited 902 men into this 33rd New Jersey, a huge regiment. As soon as they got their enlistment money, 244 of them took off and left.
That's so bad. Oh my God.
If they got their first paycheck and left, took off. Hence the nickname, the Mutinous 33rd. But that's how they got their nickname.
Aren't they the guys that end up getting captured at this battle, though?
A lot of them do.
Yeah.
Peachtree Creek at this moment, they're going to be the target of Scott's Rebels Brigade here. They're going to be the target. And the reason why they were so far ahead and by themselves is earlier in the day, some rebels that were captured and brought to John Geary personally lied to his face and said, no, there's no rebels around here. These aren't the droids you're looking for. If it's some inexplicable reason, Geary believes them. And so he's quite surprised when he hears a Scots brigade attacking the New Jersey men who ran right through them. The only person who ravaged more men from the state of New Jersey than General Thomas Scott was Snooky. That's how bad they got destroyed. Now, Scott's men basically demanded the 33rd New Jersey's colors, and when they refused, they shot the color bearer and they took him. And they immediately took the high ground from these New Jersey men that they were holding. The commander of the 33rd, Lieutenant Colonel Enos Fornock, he orders a full retreat, or Operation GTFO, let's get the hell out of here. And Scott's men are going to move forward over that Collier's Ridge, and they're going to run into Charles Candy's 1st Brigade and a 3rd Brigade under guess who? David Ireland. That's who they're going to run into.
Ireland's here, which is pretty cool.
So Ireland and Candy are going to launch a counterattack, and they're going to push Scott back pretty quickly, way past Tenure Branch Creek. They're going to move him right down. But while this rebel push under Loring is happening, the Union commander of the 20th Corps, Joseph Hooker himself, is going to ride up to the defensive line. He's going to plant the colors. He'll say, boys, I guess we'll stop here. That's what he says. He's showing leadership. Yeah. Personal leadership he is. Now, following Loring came the division of Edward Walthall. And one of his brigades, under Edward O'Neill, moved in, and after Scott fell back, people from Gettysburg know Edward O'Neill, from Oak Ridge. Yep. He's gonna fight really, really well here. O'Neill is going to hit the right of Geary's line, which was held by the Irishman Patrick Henry Jones, the Brigade of New Yorkers, and Pennsylvania, as well as the 33rd New Jersey, right? Jones had his line ready and was holding the high ground on Collier's Ridge, and it was supported on his left by a man with the greatest facial hair in the Civil War.
Alpheus Williams.
Alpheus Williams, okay? And I will die on that hill. No one will deny me the right that he has the best facial hair in the Civil War, right? So about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, O'Neill's Alabamans and Mississippi men, they're going to be 5 deep, and they're going to hit Jones' brigade, and they're going to quickly get around Geary's right, and they're going to drive Jones' men back. So again, even though the echelon attack on the right was a disaster, it's sort of working on the left now. Stevenson's men are having a lot of success, where Hardee's men was a complete disaster. Geary's guys are going to fall back, and they're going to reform. And they're going to stop. They're going to stop Edward Neal's breakthrough, and Alpheus Williams' men are going to start to arrive on Geary's right, causing O'Neill to disappear. So Williams is late, but he gets there just in time. The Union line's holding at this point. It's doing really, really well. This is similar to Ambrose Wright, speaking of Gettysburg, where Edward O'Neill had punched a hole through the Union line, and he looked around to see who was supporting him on his right, and there was nobody there.
Yeah.
So he couldn't hold it. He had to fall back. The Battle of Peachtree Creek at this point is going to degenerate into basically a long-distance musket battle back and forth. Yep. As neither side really attempted to advance again. They just kind of stared at each other and fired.
You're just going to stare?
Yeah. The Rebs did make one last attempt as the Rebs got around Williams' rear, and they're going to run into the 123rd New York, a guy under Joseph Knife's brigade, and they're kind of sitting, hanging out, chilling, resting because they were in reserve.
Yep.
And the New Yorkers are talking about how they're going to be waltzing into Atlanta. This is going to be great. This is easy.
Is that kind of like when they want to win the World Series?
Oh, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. But they're going to be kind of hanging out there when O'Neill's men are going to get around them and attack them unsuspectingly, and they're going to be stunned. But O'Neill's guys are going to get pushed back. They're too far forward. They have no support. But they punched the line, and they held it for a little bit of time. But there was no support. So 6 p.m., daylight's disappearing now. The shooting is sporadic. It's starting to slowly disappear. The Battle of Peachtree Creek is basically winding down, and the Rebs have really failed to break the Union line and hold it. And Hood is realizing that he's about to suffer a very embarrassing defeat on his first day as commander of the Army of Tennessee. And so you can imagine Hood's attitude here at this moment.
Well, considering he doesn't even want the job to begin with, which is, if that's one of the stories is he didn't want it. I can't imagine how he's feeling right now.
I'll tell you how he's feeling.
Will you? Yes.
He's pissed. He's mad at you when I take the last beer. That's how pissed he is.
I don't get mad at you.
He was livid that his men were not able to break through, and he went off on his subordinates. Basically, that not all of his generals got into the fight. It was mismanaged in the beginning. The orders were clear. Bate got lost. Maney sat around and did nothing. No one attacked.
The Rosewoods clown was there.
Oh, that's probably what it was. Hood planned to attack, like I said, with 7 divisions. But instead of 7 divisions, he fought with 7 brigades. That's all he ended up fighting with. When you factor in Bate, you factor in Claiborne, who never got into the fight. Oh. He's like having your best bat on the bench and never bringing him in.
Well, apparently,
because he was supposed.
Sorry, go ahead.
He was supposed to be the one who took advantage of the gap, and he never got in. So when you're supposed to fight with 7 divisions against 4, now you've got 7 brigades against 4 divisions in an entrenched defensive position. You don't need to be a military West Point genius to know. You don't need Miss Cleo to tell you the future of this one, Mary. Right? That's exactly what happens. Bates gets lost. Maney's men don't do anything to move forward. Oh, Samuel French, by the way. They didn't move forward at all. They never even got off their asses. And again, Patrick Claiborne never gets into the fight, which is astounding. You know who Hood's mad at the most?
I can't even imagine.
William Hardee, of course, saying that he didn't fight as hard as Alex Stewart, which was true. Stewart's men fought their asses off at Peachtree Creek.
Yep.
Hardee's men didn't. For whatever reason, he didn't. Hardee also put his divisions in piecemeal, and he knew that the attack on the rebel right, it was half as strong as the one on the rebel left. Hood realized he probably wins. But by the time that Stewart's men got into the fight, they were fighting the army, the strength of the Union army, who were not weakened at that point.
No. And they were, I would not underestimate George Henry Thomas, because he is Army of the Cumberland is probably one of the stronger armies that you have in what Sherman has. Now, Claiborne did get a message from Hood. Hood sent him an urgent message because he had been like, he was going to attack, and the Hood's like, don't. And I'm sure Claiborne was like, what the hell? Like, what is going on here? Around 4 o'clock at one point, General Thomas is going to send Sherman a message that says, Hood attacked me in full force about 4 p.m. and has persisted until now, attacking very fiercely, but he was repulsed handsomely by the troops all along my line. So those troops, are like they are fighting so hard. And that's the impression that, if you read Howard's account of it in his memoirs, he just talks about how hard those guys fought at Peachtree Creek. Like it's just this like relentless, like he was like, and then they did this, and then they did that, and they repulsed this attack. And at one point, they thought they were going to get swept, and then they fought back again. So it's very much a hard fighting battle.
It was. And of course, while the battle's going on, Sherman's proud watching his men. Actually, no, he didn't. You know why?
He's with Schofield.
He didn't know the battle was even happening.
No, he didn't. And he's sending all these messages. He's telling like at one point he sends a message at 3:25 p.m. to Thomas being like, "You can take the city of Atlanta." And Thomas is like, "I'm in a friggin' battle, dude. Stop."
Like, he's over there. He's with McPherson. He's east of Atlanta. He doesn't know what's happening. But I mean, he must have been happy though, right? No, he wasn't. He was pissed off because while Hood was engaged with Thomas, neither Schofield nor McPherson marched into Atlanta to take the city while they were fighting north of it.
Yep.
And he was pretty pissed off at that. But here's the thing, though. Not sure how he could be mad when Sherman didn't know about the battle anyway.
No.
But also, he never ordered them to do it. They're not just going to march in on their own. And that's the thing, too, is when you look at the opportunity John Bell Hood had, when Sherman doesn't even know the battle's even happening, he has a chance to defeat the largest part of his army north of the city and really screw up Sherman's plans to take Atlanta. But because of Confederate mismanagement by his underlings, it gets completely screwed up. The Battle of Peachtree Creek was one that Hood's plan was very, very good, but the execution was terrible. And this is going to be the opening act of the final struggle of Atlanta. And this was the Confederates' best chance. By far to hold the city, it was their best chance.
Yep.
Robert D. Jenkins, in his book, The Battle of Peachtree Creek, in his quote, he writes, "The beginning of the war for the Deep South in the Confederacy, the beginning of the end of the war for the Deep South in the Confederacy. Peachtree Creek was the first nail in the coffin of Atlanta and the Confederacy. Peachtree Creek, again, was followed up by Confederate losses at Ezra Church, Jonesboro, and Decatur, culminating in the fall of Atlanta on September 2nd of 1864. Yeah. Okay. Now, he said of Hood at the battle, again, he said, this is in Jenkins' book, Hood demonstrated his good skill in planning, but it would display a failure to grasp the logistic requirements needed to make it a success, which is kind of what Lee said about him, about how his weaknesses were, right?
Yeah.
A rebel win at Peachtree Creek would have gone a long way in helping Hood hold Atlanta, but it doesn't mean he would have, but it would have been a big part to help.
Yeah.
But in the end, it was a disaster. And Hood Davis had to know it. He had to know it. The battle cost the Army of Tennessee 2,500 men. And if you wonder, was Davis having a little bit of buyer's remorse about his decision to put in Hood? Well, I'm just saying, because after the battle, and there's some great passive-aggressive quotes after this battle. After the battle, Davis is speaking to a group in Macon, Georgia. And he says, and again, this is Davis with these quotes, "I put a man in command who I knew would strike an honestly and manly blow for the city, and many a Yankee's blood was made to nourish the soil before the prize was won." And in the crowd was Joseph E. Johnston, hearing this, who later, for the rest of his life, referred to Hood sarcastically as the striker of manly blows. That's what he called him going forward.
That is so passive. Wow.
And he was not, and he was
That's
obviously
so
not
passive aggressive.
He was not happy about the Confederate loss, but you have to wonder, part of him was laughing on the inside. Because he knew that he was the wrong guy at the wrong time. But in Hood's defense, and again, this is in Hood's defense, it should have worked. It should have worked. Because if he attacked right, kind of like Spring Hill, kind of like Franklin, and we've been critical on Hood here. We have on certain things.
We were nice to him with Gaines Mill, because he deserved
we
that.
Have, but you call it straight. But in Hood's defense, if Hardee had did what he was supposed to do here, this is a difference. This is a whole different story.
Oh,
but again, it didn't work out. But at the end of the day, the buck stops here. And he is put in charge to fight offensive and responsible. He has a reputation of being over-aggressive, flying by the seat of his pants. And whatever Hardee was doing, who the hell knows? But it really echoed that point. And at the end of the day, the Battle of Peachtree Creek blew up in the Confederates' face, and it puts egg on Hood's face, ultimately costing the city of Atlanta in the big picture.
It's going to eventually do that. And it's real kind of, I don't know if I want to call this ironic or not, but at 11 o'clock on the evening of July the 20th, Hood is going to send a message to Richmond. At 3 o'clock today, a portion of Hardee's and Stuart's corps drove the enemy into the breastworks, but did not gain possession of them. Our loss slight. Let's see how that ages. It does not age very well, but I get it. He's trying to put on this whole thing like he's new to command. Like, this is kind of like Meade at Gettysburg, new to command. And this is something, also to compare to a Union guy like Meade. Hood, from what I've read, I don't know if he really wanted this command or not. He's 33 years old here, right? He's young. And that's not saying that age matters with this at all. This is like, he's taking a plan. And as you said, there's miscommunication that is causing issues. Hardee really does not do well here. And perhaps the best guy, Claiborne, is held back. And I know there's some that would probably disagree about that, but how might it have gone if Claiborne had been thrown in first? Maybe the same.
Well,
I don't know. Like,
if the plan had worked the way it was intended to, Bate hits where he's supposed to, it goes right down the line. There's going to be a break somewhere down the line. I mean, the Confederates broke the Union line even with Hardee's men really not doing what they were supposed to do. Claiborne's going to go in and break that gap, and he's going to do it, and he's going to smash right through him. And that's probably what would have happened. But again, it just didn't. It just didn't. So, sometimes you look at John Bell Hood as kind of like Charlie Brown in the football.
Yep.
He has the best intentions. He has good plans. But at the end of the day, the execution from his subordinates, whether it be Cheatham, Spring Hill, whether it be Hardee here, there's always somebody who doesn't do their job. And again, it's just one of those things. Is it bad luck? Is it bad communication? Is it the fact that some of these guys don't like Hood? We'll never know, but it's just a constant with him. And he comes up with these really good plans to attack, but somewhere along the way, somebody screws up and foils it, and he always falls back on him. But when you take the big chair, you got to take the good and the bad and the ugly. It just seems like it falls back on him.
Yeah.
And again, that's just the way Peachtree Creek is. And it's a great what if for the Confederacy. Now, play the what if game, but let's suppose Hood does break the line and force them back. What are they going to do?
They can't go back across the Chattahoochee because Sherman has gone. He's basically, like I said earlier, that the Chattahoochee is like the Rubicon at that point for him. He can't go back at that point.
Right. So it's tough to say, but he would have right off the bat, if he has a big victory there, well, now the morale's up again. Well, now we got a guy who's a fighter. Now it's Lee at the 7 days coming off of Johnston at the Peninsula. We got a guy who fights now. Maybe there's that happens. Mm-hmm. But again, it doesn't work out for them. And unfortunately for the Confederacy and John Bell Hood, this is a stain on his record that's going to stick with him. And again, it's going to reinforce the fact that he's aggressive. He loses a lot of men. And really, it's a battle that probably should have been better. But at the end of the day, that's what happens.
Yep.
Communication, terrain, weather. This one was miscommunication.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And Howard, in his memoirs, he, like I said, go read his, what he writes about Peachtree Creek, because it's really good. He said, thus ended in defeat Hood's execution of Johnston's plan for a general battle at Peachtree Creek. And he goes on to say, we had a great impulse of joy because we had won the battle. The Confederates had at this time, besides the affliction of death, a great sense of chagrin because they had lost. And that's how he ends it right there. And you can see he's quite happy that they've won the battle. My own thoughts on Hood are that he's really, really good, up until Gettysburg, he's really, really good. And even after that at Chickamauga, he's still good. But he gets that wound, and I think that's what slows him down. But I also think it's kind of like Ambrose Burnside on the Union side. As commander of an army, he is kind of in over his head, and there are some people that just are not suited for that. And I do think John Bell Hood is one of those guys. He's good in the lower commands where he is someone above him.
True, but counterpoint, you could be the best football coach in the world. if your quarterback sucks and you can't make plays,
Oh
you're
yeah,
not
your
going to win.
subordinates.
So you really depend on that, and I think Hood's somewhere in between. I
Yeah.
think his plan at Peachtree was really, really
It
strong,
was.
but the execution was really, really bad, and they were that close. They were
Yeah.
that
And
close.
I think that
I mean,
does go back to the subordinates and a kind of a level of respect. And it's just kind of the story of Army of Tennessee too, that this is how it's been, especially since Shiloh, going back that far. It's been,
mhm.
you look at Braxton Bragg in command and trying to oust him. Hardy's involved in that. You know, Joseph E. Johnston, you kind of see a little bit more, I think, peace or whatever, if you want to call it that. But then he gets removed and it gets thrown back into this kind of instability again.
Yeah. It's true, but it's definitely a missed opportunity for the Confederates. So what's coming up for us next, Mary?
Well, before we end the episode, I do want to talk about one really cool piece of trivia I found, and that is
Oh, okay.
that a soldier from the 19th Michigan, he found a female soldier
Oh,
at this
wow. Okay.
battle, and she had been wounded. She was alive when they found her, and she'd been wounded. And there was also rumors that there was 2 other female soldiers that had been captured by Union troops at this battle. I just thought that was a really cool piece of trivia that I found about this battle. Another one, I found a quote from Emerson Opdyke, and he said, "I have never seen the dead rebels lie so thickly strewn upon the ground since the Battle of Shiloh," in reference to Peachtree Creek. And another soldier from the 70th Indiana. "We have fought the battle of this campaign and given the enemy the soundest thrashing they have had yet." And then Major Thomas McGuire from Loring's division. "It was a shocking loss of life without any results. We miss General Johnson so much. He would have retreated to Macon rather than make such a sacrifice."
And that tells a story. It goes versus playing offense versus defense. So it's definitely one to definitely consider. So
So
are we done?
yes, next up for us, we are going to be talking about the Battle of Reams Station. And then after that, we are going to be coming back to this, to the Western Theater, to the Atlanta campaign, to talk about the Battle of Jonesboro, which is kind of that battle that really settles it. That means the Union is finally going to take the city of Atlanta. Soon, 2 days after the Battle of Peachtree Creek is fought, the Battle of Atlanta will be fought, and General James Burbsy McPherson will be killed. And then on July 27th, General Oliver Otis Howard will take command of the Army of the Tennessee. And then you have some more battles happening in the Atlanta campaign as well. But we will be back. Sorry, go ahead.
A lot of changes coming. Yeah. So battle Reams Station coming up. We're going to talk about old Winnie Boy, and then we'll get to Jonesboro. We're going to talk about Patrick Claiborne, who does finally get into action in this. So, all right. Yeah. So any final words from you there, Fincher, before we sign off and go to the great beyond?
Well, thank you for bringing it like you always do. Thank you to all our listeners for supporting us for these 133 episodes. And we will be back with y'all next week, or no, 2 weeks from now with another episode.
Yep. One last thing we got to say thoughts and prayers for our friend Pete Carmichael. Yes. Unfortunately died this past weekend. He was a friend of ours, a friend of a podcast. So he'll be missed tremendously, a huge loss to the Civil War community. So our thoughts and prayers with his family, and hopefully he's in a better place.
Yes.
So we'll leave it at that.
Pete was a great guy, and we were happy to know him as a friend, to get to meet him and all that. So yeah, huge loss to the Civil War community.
A huge loss. So, all right. So off we go, Mary. Again, we have a great weekend. We'll talk to you all, as they say, on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.